Hello, you guys. Welcome back to the Vintage Variety Hour. I hope you loved the first one. I know I did. And today we are back for some new, interesting articles. Like I said, I have been collecting quite a stack of vintage magazines. And the minute we got home from our last shopping trip where we went out for our anniversary and we just kind of spent a lazy day working through some antique malls. And at the end of that time, I had found way too many magazines to make them independent videos. There will be some of those still coming. In today's episode, we're going to get through a couple of articles about John Lennon and Yoko Ono. We have an article about Diana. We get the 1910s from this book. And we're going to have a look at Princess Catherine. The first article comes from that same magazine where we read about Ethel, Jackie, and Coretta Scott King. Today, I thought it would be interesting to go back to a couple of articles that were just smaller, sort of not feature articles, but just looks at things happening back then. So one was this page, which this really was a gossipy type magazine. There's all sorts of news about who's dating who and etc. in Hollywood, but it gave this little look at Audrey Hepburn. And so she's just going about her business there. And I thought I would read a little bit to you. It says, Audrey vacationed in Rome and went shopping like any other tourist. How about Audrey Hepburn's interview in Milan, in which she's quoted as saying, "Nothing about my husband matters to me any longer. I am completely recovered. I have spent 2 years in hell, surely the worst of my life. Now I am free and at peace." Maybe you think Audrey's pop-off didn't raise eyebrows in Hollywood, where Mel Ferrer is currently getting ready to produce Peter Pan, maybe with Mia Farrow. Mel has always given the impression that Audrey walked out on him and that he wants her back in a great big way. Previous to the Italian outburst, Audrey has refrained from saying anything. Well, now we know how she feels. I don't even know if any of that's true. That seems like a lot of gossipy talk to me. What about y'all? Then we have an article here about what's going on with Elvis and Priscilla. Why are they going their separate ways? Look at her hair, you guys. My goodness. He was known as having the bouffant, but wow, what a hairstyle she has. It says that everyone thought that when Elle finished, he, Prissy, and the baby would all go back to their home in Memphis together, of course, a happy little family. Instead, reports had it that Prissy packed off alone with the baby, leaving Elvis in Hollywood. I'm not going to read more of this because who cares? Y'all may care, but I am not up for gossipy nonsense. But look at this hairstyle. It tells people here's how to get the hairdos of the month. There's little tutorials for the 1968 woman in all of us. Then we have the article that I think we came here for. Yes, John Lennon's interracial love affair. So I'm not really reading this for, like I said, this all sounds kind of gossipy to me, but I do think it's interesting. Let's look. It says, last July, John dedicated an avant-garde art show in London to his new love, Japanese sculptress Yoko Ono. They posed for photographers at Wright and declared their love for each other. A few days before, John's wife, Cynthia, had consulted lawyers about a divorce. The shocking inside story. John faced the reporters uneasily. In the past, he had often had a bad time with the press. They always seemed to misinterpret him, garble his words, misunderstand him, and get him in trouble with the public. Now he hugged an exotic-looking Japanese woman to his side, and his wife, Cynthia, was nowhere in sight. The inevitable no comment was expected, but John surprised them all. He looked tenderly at the Japanese, we'll keep going, woman, and then back at the reporters. "I love her," he said simply. When asked about his 6-year marriage to Cynthia, his high school sweetheart, he said that it is over, though not legally. Then someone asked him where Cynthia was, and he said curtly, "I don't know." John's new love is Yoko Ono, a 34-year-old Japanese sculptress and underground filmmaker. And to complicate matters, she is already married to another man. John publicly confessed his love for her at an art show called To Yoko from John Lennon in London. The show consisted of 365 helium-filled balloons, scores of charity collecting boxes, and in one tiny room of a West End art gallery. It's a dedication to Yoko, like the dedication in a book. I don't love the Queen like I love Yoko. I do love her, of course I do. Later, he went outside and released the balloons, and the show was over. John and Yoko had reportedly met in India, where both of them were studying transcendental meditation with the Maharishi Yogi. All of the Beatles were there with their wives, and the first big news break from the Maharishi's study center was that Ringo Starr and his wife Maureen had upped and left, complaining about the terrible food. Shortly after, Paul McCartney and his girlfriend Jane Asher also left. When Cynthia Lennon parted company with the Maharishi and John stayed behind, many people assumed it was because John's capacity for meditation was greater. People didn't know that he might have met Yoko and been entranced by her oriental charm. Well, that's that. I think that's enough of that. But there's a peek at the interracial love affair of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. As a little aside, my husband and I actually saw Yoko Ono in Central Park one time. We had gone to see the John Lennon, I think there's a memorial or maybe is there a flame? I don't remember if it's just like a memorial there. But she was walking with a rose toward that memorial and had her big sunglasses on, and we walked past her and I thought, oh my goodness, I think that's her. And we kind of started whispering to each other, and then as we passed, she turned around and smiled at us and kept walking. And yeah, so we got to see Yoko. So she, in my mind, was still devoted to him long after his death, because that would have been in the year 2000 or so. So there is that. Well, let's read this article about Diana, shall we? Last time we got into the issues about the monarchy, and I just kind of thought today that it would be fun to go back and read some of this about I Won't Go Quietly, and then also the part of the article that was from Andrew Morton. Since he wrote the book about her, it's probably pretty authoritative. This one is in Newsweek magazine, so it's way less gossipy and a little more newsy than some sources would be. In an extraordinary TV interview, Diana candidly discusses her bulimia and depression, her husband's infidelity, and her own. The princess will survive this crisis, but will the monarchy? It's been half a century since television started to become a central part of the human experience, and for much of that time, it has seemed more a curse than a blessing. But every so often, something blooms in a wasteland, a moment that brings drama and emotions into the living rooms of millions in a way that no other technology has ever managed. One such moment was the BBC's interview last week with Diana, Princess of Wales. By the time the show had been broadcast by ABC in the US, some 200 million people in more than 100 countries had watched the princess talk of bulimia, postpartum depression, self-mutilation, the breakdown of her marriage to Prince Charles, an affair, and not least, the British monarchy and its future. It was riveting. She won't go quietly, Diana said of herself. That's the problem. And boy, is that ever true. Have you guys watched that interview? I mean, I think probably we all have. But if not, if you're one of the younger people, go and watch that interview. It is pretty shocking. She deliciously skewered her husband's relationship with his mistress, Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Camilla. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. She admitted that she had had an affair herself with a cad who later sold her story. I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him, but I was very let down. She openly doubted whether Charles would ever become king and implied that her son William should succeed Queen Elizabeth, an astonishing suggestion, and one that we now know has failed, right? Diana's coup had been carefully planned and kept secret from even close advisors. That's talking about the coup of having gotten the interview. The interview was a complete shock I believe that's the Martin Bashir one, yes. It says, "I'm a very strong person," Diana told Martin Bashir, her interviewer, "and to cope with what life has thrown at her, she has doubtless had to be. But mere bravery, foolhardy bravery, is boring." In 100 little inflections of body language, by contrast, Diana married bravery to vulnerability. It was those unbidden moments, the occasional drop of the head so that a cloud of hair obscured her eyes, the little sniffs, the crooked smiles, the unconscious way she touched her lips when talking of bulimia. That made this great TV. So those are the facial expressions that they're highlighting here. The crooked smile here on the bottom. It does communicate. Our body language communicates so much, doesn't it? She says it says her honesty has blown a hole in the British establishment. She spoke of things one is not meant to acknowledge in upper-class Britain, land of the stiff upper lip, and the pulled-up socks. One makes the best of a bad job. One doesn't embarrass the servants, especially if one has been to the manor born, as Diana undoubtedly was. So, yeah, it goes on about the Buckingham Palace's response. Above all, there was Diana, the princess of the royal family's dreams, turned out to be a nightmare. She wouldn't play by the rules. She was more popular than her husband, one that he found hard to live with. She did not react with required equanimity to the discovery that he loved someone else, Camilla Parker Bowles. But above all, she wouldn't give in. She encouraged her friends to cooperate with Andrew Morton, whose 1992 book, Diana, Her True Story, exposed the full horror of the marriage. Here's that kind of triptych of the three people. Isn't that fascinating now that Queen Camilla has actually won the day? At this point, if you'll recall, I'm old enough to recall this one, that everybody basically hated Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana had called her the Rottweiler and really talked poorly of her. And, you know, everybody can judge that situation for themselves, but I will say King Charles was in a terrible situation at that time as Prince of Wales. And he had asked multiple times to marry Camilla, is my understanding. And so, I don't know, part of me just grieves for that young man who was in a situation where he was not free, and it set everyone up for just an awful situation, I think. I'm really glad that the modern royal family doesn't seem to hold to the same constrictions that it did at that point. So she talks about what was it like to live by herself. She put a brave face on her isolated appearance as a disillusioned, disenfranchised member of the royal family. "No, I'm not really on my own," she said, a sentiment belied by her almost monastic life at Kensington Palace. The cloistered quiet is broken only by the shrill sound of the telephone, an instrument that is at once her confessional, her best friend, and her occasional doom. She worships daily at the temple of her body. Interesting language there. Rigorous in her adherence to a Spartan diet of exercise, massage, therapy, and medication. Often the Princess of Wales is in bed by 8, alone. Her solitary existence, largely self-imposed, worries her dwindling circle of friends. Such loneliness. She doesn't know who she can trust, says Lucia Flecha de Lima, wife of the Brazilian ambassador and the surrogate mother who has given her a safe haven in her home in Washington, D.C. It talks about her daily routine as a monastic thing. And here it shows the Queen. It shows Diana reaching out in that friendly, human way that she was known for, and in her workout gear, which is pretty remarkable. You know, I don't know everything about the royals for sure, but I don't even think Princess Anne or Prince Charles had achieved this level of just being in normal everyday clothes in front of people the way Diana did. And perhaps some would say that's like the breaking of the bubble, right? But she did it very well. We already talked about the Eton story. If you missed that in the first episode, you'll want to go back and hear that. It's all about William and his first time at Eton. And that's what we get from this magazine. Let's go ahead and move into our 1910s decade. This one starts us out with a photo that's actually relevant to our Radium Girls book. It's the story of war. This says, 2 sounds defined the decade. First, there was the clatter of machines for transport, manufacture, machines that changed America forever. Then came the thunder of guns as war engulfed the world. D.W. Griffith steered film away from melodrama and slapstick. Siegfried relied on the tried and true formula of giving his audience an eyeful. And this is an example of the eyeful that he was giving. On stage and screen, glorious excess, it says. Irving Berlin wrote that a pretty girl is like a melody. But a lot of pretty girls, that is a spectacle people will pay to see. Ziegfeld, former manager of a sideshow, put his insight to work, and thus was born Broadway's best-loved revue. Out of the vulgar leg show, Siegfried has fashioned a thing of grace and beauty, cooed a reviewer in 1907. So, talking about camera angles, cross-cutting, close-ups, and wide shots, that these early advances were changing film from being something that was either slapstick or melodrama to now it was beginning to come into a more mature existence. A killer at sea and one at home. When RMS Titanic scraped its hull on an iceberg and sank into the North Atlantic on April 14th, 1912, the disaster grabbed headlines and the national consciousness like none before it. The passenger list on the world's largest and most luxurious ship, 1/6 of a mile long with a price tag of $7.5 million, mirrored the social order. Each person's station in life would decide his or her chance of escaping death. Hyped as unsinkable, the Titanic left England for New York with only enough lifeboats for half the ship's passengers, whose lives were worth saving. It was this deadly calculation that gripped the public. All but one of the 50 children who died had been traveling in steerage. 3/4 of those in third class drowned, while nearly 2/3 of those in first class were saved, among them the wife of industrialist John J. Astor. Today, the story of the 1,500 dead still tugs at our memory, but nearly forgotten is the far greater loss of life caused by a worldwide influenza epidemic that began in 1918. Yeah, it was nearly forgotten until the pandemic of 2020. And then we all revived it and talked about the one 100 years ago. But this photo shows a flu victim being treated at that time with sheets up around them. They're wearing masks. The view is actually quite familiar, isn't it? That was the influenza epidemic of 1918. The 500 employees of the Triangle Shirtwaist Company were about to head home on March 25th, 1911, when a fire broke out in the cutting room. Feeding on piled scraps of cloth, flames raced through the factory, which occupied the top 3 stories of a Manhattan loft building. Workmen on the 8th floor got out fast, as did executives on the 10th. But on the 9th floor, the bosses had locked the exits to keep the seamstresses, mostly Jewish and Italian immigrants, ages 15 to 13, at their machines. Dozens crowded onto the rickety fire escape, but it collapsed under their weight. Others plunged to their death trying to slide down the freight elevator cable. By the time fire trucks arrived with ladders that reached only to the 6th floor, Desperate women were leaping from the windows. I learned a new sound, a more horrible sound than description can picture, one reporter wrote. It was the thud of a speeding, living body on a stone sidewalk. The final toll was 146. The triangle conflagration galvanized the drive for better working conditions, but it also showed how little workers' lives were worth in an age of no-holds-barred capitalism. The factory owners were acquitted of manslaughter charges, and though the families of 23 victims won a lawsuit, the judge awarded them just $75 apiece. Oh my goodness. Oh gosh, these are the bodies. Oh my goodness. Two silent giants meet. This is a fascinating photograph. It's Charlie Chaplin and Helen Keller. It says they were among the most celebrated people in America when they met in Hollywood in 1918. Keller, who was a renowned author and lecturer, had gone west that year to appear in a movie. Blind and deaf from the age of 19 months, she had learned to speak, read, and write with the help of teacher Anne Sullivan, who became her constant companion. With Sullivan's assistance, Keller had graduated from Radcliffe College. Now she was traveling the continent. While in California, she and Sullivan dined with Chaplin, who had made his signature picture, The Tramp, 3 years earlier. And what did the movie star and the Hollywood newcomers talk about? Him, mostly, and his troubled marriage to young actress Mildred Harris. Though unable to see his flickering image, Keller took pleasure in the films, proving no more immune to Chaplin's charms than millions of others. It says Keller would listen to a speaker by placing her fingers on that person's lips and voice box, as she does here with Chaplin. Isn't that fascinating? That's a very interesting picture, very beautiful. The war to end all wars. In November 1916, Woodrow Wilson was reelected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." 4 months later, after German U-boats sank 3 U.S. ships and intelligence agents intercepted a German telegram proposing an alliance with Mexico, Wilson committed his nation to history's first global conflict, already 3 years old. The world must be made safe for democracy, the president declared. The job, leaders in Congress said, would take 6 weeks. In fact, it took 2 years until November 1918. Along the way, a peacetime army of 200,000 was transformed into a fighting force nearly 5 million strong. U.S. troops helped break the war's long stalemate. Their morale crumbling, Germans revolted, and the guns soon fell silent. U.S. combat losses were relatively light, 53,000 dead, compared with Europe's millions. But the doughboys had seen horrors that changed them forever. Wartime industry had given blacks and women new opportunities and new impatience with second-class citizenship. In fact, many Americans sought new freedoms and new kinds of fun. They would find both in the 1920s. So here we have photos of a man in front of a factory worsted weight mechanism. It says he worked at the world's largest woolen worsted mills in the world. So that's a giant set of factories. Here we have Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller. It says Bill Gates has been attacked as a monopolist in a similar way to John D. Rockefeller. Big boss men. We get a mention of labor relations, and we have some quotes from people during these years. I will read a few because I see some names that were interesting. So far as I can now recall, this is Booker T. Washington in 1901. So far as I can now recall, the first knowledge that I got of the fact that we were slaves and the freedom of the slaves was being discussed was early one morning before day, when I was awakened by my mother, kneeling over her children and fervently praying that Lincoln and his armies might be successful, and that one day she and her children might be free. John Muir, a personal someone that I admire, says, "Any fool can destroy trees. They cannot run away. And if they could, they would still be destroyed, chased and hunted down as long as fun or a dollar could be got out of their bark hides, branching horns, or magnificent bold backbones. Through all the wonderful, eventful centuries since Christ's time, and long before that, God has cared for these trees, saved them from drought, disease, avalanches, and 1,000 straining, leveling tempests and floods. But he cannot save them from fools. Only Uncle Sam can do that." That was his appeal for our national parks in 1901. We'll end with this, it seems appropriate. Upton Sinclair in the jungle. The men upon the floor were going about their work. Neither squeals of hogs nor tears of visitors made any difference to them. One by one, they hooked up the hogs, and one by one, with a swift stroke, they slit their throats. There was a long line of hogs with squeals and lifeblood ebbing away, until at last, each vanished with a splash into a huge vat of boiling water. It was all so very businesslike that one watched it, fascinated. It was pork making by machinery, pork making by applied mathematics. That's from The Jungle in 1906. So that's our look at the 1900s through the 1919s, or the 19-teens in quotes. And the rest of the photography that we looked at was from the 1910s. Next time we will get into the 1920s. I'm enjoying this book. I think it's really helpful for getting into the mood of the Radium Girls. This last one gets us right up to the time period that the Radium Girls were operating in. So that's particularly interesting to me. Okay, you guys, now we get to something that's really fun. Calls her Princess Kate, which now there's some kind of dickering about because now she's known as officially Princess Catherine. But she was introduced to the world as Kate, William and Kate. And so here we get Royal Mom, Future Queen. And I thought we would just look at a few of the features about her. The first one was just this one, which is darling. It says, dressing the kids. She looks to the past for Charlotte and George's trend-setting outfits. So he had some little Crocs and a sweater and some adorable little shorts. What a cute little guy. Now, of course, he's what? Pushing towards 10, maybe? Is that right? Oh, he's got these sweet little classic traditional outfits. So cute. And then darling little outfits with Charlotte. So I just thought that was kind of cute and fun. This whole magazine is all about her, and so we're not going to go through it all today. But this was a really sweet photo. It says, married 24 hours. The day after their wedding, Kate and Will stroll from Buckingham Palace to a helicopter waiting to take them to a secret destination. So this was their kind of honeymoon photo. Very lovely. It says, traditionally, gifts of wood mark the 5th anniversary, just right for this oak solid couple. It says, display until July 2016. So I don't know if we get a print date. I'm not giving you a print date, but this acts like it's the 5th anniversary. We get to see photos of them together, them attending a gala, doing a little painting with kids in LA's inner city, and then meeting the Obamas here. We've got the top hat and Epsom derby. this is the article that I kind of wanted to read with you guys. It's called Kate and Ma'am. She never met her late mother-in-law, Diana, but Kate has forged a bond with her husband's grandmother, who genuinely seems to enjoy the princess's company. And of course, we know until the end that was true. They really loved one another. And it says, when Prince William left Kate behind for 6 weeks in 2012 to serve with the Royal Air Force in the Falklands, Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth helped make sure the new princess didn't feel lonely. She invited Kate to 4 official events in her first year as a royal, something she hadn't done for her daughters-in-law Diana and Sarah Ferguson. It was a way to help smooth Kate's transition to public life and a signal of the Queen's high regard. The feeling is obviously mutual. Says a palace insider, Kate is going to look and learn with the Queen. Their relationship has only grown warmer. The Queen has bestowed Kate with the Royal Family Order, the highest honor for a female royal, and lent her jewelry from her priceless collection. I just love them. Honestly, I love them both. I know I'm an American through and through, but my goodness, I think they're just fantastic. I think Queen Elizabeth was the most remarkable woman that we have seen in leadership in a very long time. I would put an asterisk and say Margaret Thatcher is also quite fantastic, but I admire the Queen so much. But Kate has been such a great addition, hasn't she? Here they are sharing a joke, talking together, enjoying the baby. I love it. I think Kate has always shown such regard and respect for the Queen, and it makes me hold Kate in high regard. What about you? I just love that she held this woman in honor throughout her life. This shows some of the shared jewelry and lent jewelry along the way, and the tiaras that were worn. I believe this one is the love knot tiara. All right. And then the magazine finishes out with pictures of Elizabeth and Philip in India. How great. That was a good one. I love some royals. What about you guys? All right. I thought it would be appropriate, since we read that first article about John and Yoko, and I really didn't know, I had not read it before we read it together, so I didn't know what tenor it would take. But I pulled open this Entertainment Weekly that's focused on Lennon's legacy. And I thought it would be good to read through together. One thing that was just really quick in here, there were actually a few things I wanted to point out to you guys. So we're going to read this article about Yoko, but then this was just funny. It said Pop's most synthetic flavors of the month. Oh my goodness, this is from 1990. I remember this whole incident. Do you guys remember the Milli Vanilli fiasco and how it turned out to be 2 heavyset guys that, were doing the singing? Oh, my dog has emerged. That's Honey. She came out of her little cave under my bed. Well, Milli Vanilli, they were thought of as hot stuff and they could dance, but boy, they were not doing the singing at all. So that little article just kind of made me laugh. There's also a whole article about Misery. You guys, I love that story so much. It's so terrifying. Kathy Bates and James Caan do such a great job. It's a classic. And then the final page here was just the movies that were out this week. Before we read the article, the movies out this week were Dances with Wolves, Home Alone, Rocky V, and then other movies as well. But it shows Home Alone, they're taking the cake in the box office, which is pretty fun. I remember that. That was such a fun movie. And of course, Rocky V was big too. My family had been big Rocky fans, and so we watched all of those early ones. This article says, give Yoko a chance. So we're just going to read this short article about John and Yoko. Yoko Ono must have the most consistent public approval rating of our time. Everyone hates her. Prominent publications have been going after her for the better part of 2 decades, with a hostility that has at times been baldly racist in tone. I'm not even going to read some of these headlines, but they are racist and sometimes sexist. I'm not reading those either. Filthy, but invariably unflattering. 10 years after the death of her husband, partner, and companion, Ono is still as much of a scapegoat as the day she had the bad timing to enter the lives of the Beatles just as they were breaking up. So why does the world hate Yoko so much? She is accused of being willful, bossy, and controlling, a kind of Stepford wife in reverse. Did she, to summarize the anti-Yoko party line, take an adorable, confused working-class lad and by some unspecified and probably unspecifiable means force him to eat macrobiotic and espouse the belief that woman is the N-word of the world? We have yet to see any evidence of coercion. She may well be a bossy and controlling individual, but many people, Donald Trump, for example, have exhibited the same characteristics and haven't been taken to task for them for the way that Yoko has. Well, that's really funny. He has now, editors of Entertainment Weekly 1990. Donald Trump has gotten his due, I assure you. But they're saying, of course, that her bossiness has gotten her taken to task and that he's bossy and decisive also. Interesting. That they are characteristics the world doesn't tend to find appealing in women in general, or wives in particular, says more about what the world expects of wives than it does about Yoko's character. By winning the love of a man for whom millions yearned, Yoko effectively usurped an international dream. Unlike Cynthia Lennon or other Beatle wives of the time, she made no attempt to stay out of the spotlight in the presence of fans. Where John went, so went Yoko. She has never been forgiven. I think that's an interesting observation, that she usurped the role that many people wished for themselves, and then she had the gall to go around in public with him and not just let people get on with their fantasies with her in the back room. You know, they could go on thinking of him as a single young lad who they might win the heart of without having to consider his wife or his love interest. Here she is in her apartment in the Dakota, New York City, May 1990. She said, "I'm not playing the role of the widow," she said. "I am the widow." So there she is, a look at Yoko Ono. Okay, y'all. This magazine, I just want you to know, I got it for free, the next one we're going to read, and it is totally a nonsense article, but it was free, and it's the printing right after Elvis died, which is why I grabbed it. But again, I will just specify, it was free. It's the National Enquirer from September 20th, 1977, and it says, Elvis hours before he died. So this is the last known photograph of Elvis, and they print it. The last photo of Elvis alive. Copyright 1977, hand upraised in what was to become his final salute to fans. This is him driving into Graceland, entering his Memphis estate for the last time. This photo, shot by a fan and obtained exclusively by the Enquirer, was taken at 12:28 on August 16th. Just a few hours later, Elvis was dead. I don't know if any of that is true. My whole life has taught me not to believe anything printed in this newspaper. So if you guys all tell me that actually it was acquired by somebody else and they printed it wrongly, I wouldn't actually be surprised at all. But that's what it says. Last photo here. And then there was a few things inside that I just thought were interesting. One was a photo of Sylvester Stallone filming shortly after he had gotten famous from Rocky. And so I just thought that was interesting, that they were following Sylvester Stallone and showing him. And then it's this man, Robert Call, with his wife Nancy and daughter Abby. He's the one who took that last photo of Elvis alive. Elvis was driving the car. There was a lady sitting in the front with him and 2 men in the back. I had Abby in my arms Almost right up against the window, she was hollering, "Hi," and grinning ear to ear. Elvis smiled really big, then he put on the brakes for a second, pointed to Abby and waved to her. That's when my husband took the picture. The time was 12:28. I know because I turned to a lady and asked her the time. Later that day, we heard on TV that Elvis had died. It was incredible. We had just seen this man smiling and laughing. So that is the story from the National Enquirer. So y'all make of that what you will. I totally don't blame you if you don't believe any of it. Maybe I don't either. Who knows? But that's the one that I got for free, and that was the story that seemed worth telling from it. The final thing that I'm going to do, and I hope to do this in a few episodes, I got this book. There's a story behind it, which maybe I'll go into at some point. Suffice it to say, Penn Jones Jr. was one of the early, quote, conspiracy theorists. And by early, I mean this was published in 1966, so just 3 years after the Kennedy assassination. He is a local man here in Dallas, and he began compiling articles and research about the Kennedy assassination. The contents of the book are listed here, and I don't even know what all's in it. I literally just opened it up from the package, and so I wanted to read the introduction to it. This was published a few times, and it became really popular. He ended up having a regular magazine that he published, compiling articles from all around the world of various people who were doing ballistics studies and looking through the Warren Commission and finding the holes in it. And that is the subtitle, by the way. Forgive My Grief, Volume 1, which there are 4 volumes actually that ended up being published. A critical review of the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I will say this guy is not just some crack. He ended up having a meeting with RFK and presenting a ton of information to him, apparently. But let's get into the preface, and we'll see what we want to read after that. On a mild sunlit day in December 1963, so that would be the next month after the Kennedy assassination, a group of us walked beneath the trees toward open fields behind my house. Philippe Labro, a renowned investigator from French national television, asked questions. The Equipe, sound and cameramen from Paris, followed to record our interview. Penn Jones Jr., an old friend, stood by to watch and listen. I had asked him to be present. Labro probed for my opinion about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which had occurred in Dallas a month before. I searched for answers and gave him little satisfaction. What did I know? What did anyone know at that time? Rumors, suspicions, and speculations already suffocated the issue. I did not want to add to them. We felt certain about one thing. The story being presented to the world was so grossly pat as to be untrue. They said one troubled man had murdered the President of the United States. If it were as simple as that, why had the authorities then been so determined to close the case almost before it had opened? Why had they been so eager to drop all of the loose ends, to declare within hours of his death that Oswald was guilty alone, and then slammed the doors on the historic tragedy? One investigates the simplest crime far more profoundly than that. There were loose ends, many loose ends. Labro, for example, a man of impeccable objectivity and a trained observer, had seen Ruby almost immediately after Oswald's death. He saw Ruby calm and self-possessed at the moment that Tom Howard was standing downstairs in front of the nation's television cameras, telling the world that Ruby was in a state of emotional collapse. Some few men in this country were not satisfied with those loose ends. Some of these had obsessive theories and tried to make the loose ends arrange themselves in a way as to prove those theories. They do not count for anything. Others, however, with a great dedication to truth, wherever it might lead them, have sought to resolve these loose ends for the sake of history and truth. They have devoted themselves to gathering, sifting, and re-examining evidence. They have sought to follow truth, even when this has led them down roads that sickened and terrified them. Penn Jones belongs to this latter small group. Since that terrible day, he has dedicated himself to resolving the riddle And he has followed authentic leads, abandoned countless ones that turned out not to be authentic. Is it wise to do this? Is it wise to lift the lid from a mystery and risk releasing a stench such as the world has never known? A stench that might well damage the world? Some men have the faith that truth is the ultimate wisdom. It is a faith that can hardly be faulted. Penn Jones is moved by that faith. He also is moved by a profound sense of responsibility toward his country, toward truth, and toward evidence. The truth risks being unspeakably ugly in this instance, and at this point in its unfoldment. If, however, all evidence should ultimately lead by miracle to some simple and benign solution, the man heaving the greatest sigh of relief would be Penn Jones, Jr. They offer a list of publishing houses that the articles inside have been taken from. He gives a foreword. Penn Jones was a newspaperman, and I became aware of him in reading about the Jack Ruby case and RFK and whether or not any of them believed the conspiracy theories of the time. And I came across this man, and it turns out, y'all, that he owned the newspaper where I grew up. I grew up in the Midlothian, Texas, and he was the longtime owner of the Midlothian Mirror. And this was his oddity, that he collected information about the assassination. Here is chapter 1 of the things that he believes are worth contemplating. It says, "We thank the dedicated few who have helped in assembling the facts presented." So they have tried to bring a collection of facts that are worth consideration, that are in opposition to what the Warren Commission put forward about the JFK assassination. The first one is called Meeting at Ruby's Apartment. So I believe we'll read this and then I'll wrap up. It says, as stated in the Warren Commission report, Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police Department quoted Lee Harvey Oswald as saying about the killing of the president, quote, "People will forget that in a few days and there would be another president," end quote. This editor feels Oswald was wrong on his estimate of the nation's respect. This nation has not yet had a chance to adequately express itself over the assassination, and it may take a full-scale war to make them forget. We have been critical of the Warren report, but we are so grateful for the many answers in the 26 volumes of testimony. The answers are there for those who are willing to dig. We have felt from the very first that the final report should not have been made for at least 5 years. The report was made too soon, and too many important characters were overlooked. We have steadily maintained that much study was needed concerning the finding of Oswald by Officer J.D. Tippit. All the police radio dispatcher could tell Tippit was that the suspect was a white male about 30, slender build, height 5 feet 10 inches, 165 pounds. No clothes description, no color of hair or eyes could be given, even though there must have been several thousand men in Oak Cliff who would fit this description. Tippit found the right man in a remarkably short time. Oak Cliff is that part of Dallas south and west of the Trinity River, with a population of over 150,000. Tippit knew how to kill. He is alleged to have killed a 17-year-old Negro burglar suspect about a year before he himself was killed. The burglar was running from the scene when hit in the back by a bullet alleged to be from Tippit's gun. After reading thousands of pages of testimony, we have found what seems to be an important withholding of evidence. This evidence forces us to plead for a revival of the Warren Commission for more study and consideration concerning the assassination. The evidence concerns the testimony of George Senator, self-classified as a beggar, the roommate and admitted, quote, boyfriend of Jack Ruby. The discrepancy concerns a meeting in Ruby and Senator's apartment on the Sunday night, November 24th, 1963, after Ruby killed Oswald. After what has happened to those present at the meeting, one can presume it was an important meeting on that Sunday night. At least 6 persons present for the meeting, and 3 of them have died. At least 6 persons were present for the meeting, and 3 of them have died, strangely. A reasonable man would wonder if Senator accidentally revealed something important that particular night. On April 22nd, 1964, George Senator was being questioned by the Warren Commission on Senator's activities that Sunday after the killing of Oswald. Leading the questioning were Misters Bert W. Griffin and Leon D. Hubert, both assistant counsel of the President's Commission. Dr. Alfred Goldberg, historian, was present. So here are the questions. All right, let's continue from the point that you left the jail. This is Mr. Hubert to Mr. Senator. Did you meet anyone? Yes. Who? I was with Jim. I met Jim Martin and another attorney who I had only met for the first time, and I don't remember his name. They were waiting for you, or you met them outside? They told me they would meet me somewhere. Where was that? We met at a bar across the street from the courthouse. Do you know the name of the bar? I think it was the TV bar. The message you had was that they would meet you there, is that right? Yes. And did you go there and talk to Martin and the other lawyer? Yes, the other attorney. How long were you with them? If I recall right, I would say that in that bar we sat and had 2 or 3 beers, if I remember right. I think I said to Jim, I don't have a place to sleep or a place to go, because I was afraid to go home. You told that to Jim Martin? I told that to Jim, and I believe, wait a minute now, I believe I'm not sure, but I think I went to his house, and he said he would put me up on the couch if I was afraid to go anywheres, which I was. From there on, I was afraid to go home. Why? Why was I afraid to go home? Well, I was just scared, that's all. Of what? I don't know of what. I was scared. Obviously, you were scared that someone might try to hurt you. Very possibly, yes, or something like this. Now, who or what, I don't know, but that was the instinct I had. As a matter of fact, I was scared for about 10 days after that. You mean you were scared for 10 days after being... In other words, for about 10 days, I was afraid to sleep in the same place twice. Who I was to fear, I don't know, but just the normal thing, I was afraid. Mr. Hubert went back to the point on page 259 when he asked, after that Sunday night, when you talked to the lawyers for a while, you went home, I understand, to Jim Martin's? If I remember right. I'm not sure, but I think Jim put me up because I was afraid to go home and I didn't have a place to go to. If I remember right, I think he did. I think I went to his apartment, his home rather. Mr. Hubert tried a third time, as shown by the questioning below. You didn't see Tom Howard that night? I don't know if I did or not. I don't remember if I saw him or not that night. Did you go to bed early? You can see I can't quote if I did or I didn't. I just don't remember if I did. Then it tells us this information. This is the last page that I think is going to give us the context for what we've just heard. Bill Hunter, a native of Dallas and an award-winning newsman in Long Beach, was on duty and reading a book on the night of April 24th, 1964, in the police station called the Public Safety Building in Long Beach, California. 2 policemen going off duty came into a press room, and one shot Hunter through the heart at range, officially ruled to be, quote, more than 3 feet. The policeman said he dropped his gun, and as it fired as he picked it up. But the angle of the bullet caused him to have to change the story to one of quick draw with his fellow officer. The other officer testified that he had had his back turned when the shooting took place. Hunter, who covered the assassination for his paper, the Long Beach Press-Telegram, had written, quote, within minutes of Ruby's execution of Oswald before the eyes of millions watching television, at least 2 Dallas attorneys appeared to talk with him. He didn't tell us anything, one of the attorneys told the press after the first brief meeting. He just listened. He paid for advice. Hunter was quoting Tom Howard, who died of a heart attack in Dallas, Texas, a few months after Hunter's death. Lawyer Tom Howard was observed acting strangely to his friends 2 days before his death. Howard was taken to the hospital by, quote, a friend, according to newspapers. No autopsy was performed. Dallas Times-Herald reporter Jim Cote, or Koth, was killed by a karate chop to the throat just as he emerged from a shower in his apartment in Dallas on September 21st, 1964. His murderer was not indicted. Wow. So that's the 3 different people who had been murdered from that meeting. And that's why that man was scared, because he had been at that meeting. It says, what went on in that significant meeting in Ruby and Senator's apartment? Few are left to tell. There is no one in authority to ask the questions since the Warren Commission has made its final report and has closed the investigation. As Oswald said, people will forget that in a few days, and there would be another president. So there we go with that. His first pointing is to a meeting that happened with Jack Ruby and with others, of whom 3 were killed almost right away. That kind of points us toward a book that we're thinking about doing that's by a man named Mark Shaw. It's all about the woman Dorothy Kilgallen. If you know about Kilgallen, she was a reporter that did a race around the world, and she appeared on What's My Line, which was a situation where you wouldn't know the occupation of a random person who came onto this game show. And through asking questions, the panel would try to ascertain what that person did for a living. And it's pretty fascinating to see the questions that they asked. But she was by far the best at it. She could always kind of winkle out what the person was in their normal life. And so anyway, she was a woman who did not believe the Warren Commission. She had been a close personal friend of John F. Kennedy's. She also was the only person to speak in a non-bugged room with Jack Ruby. She went in and had a private meeting with him, and she told a few friends that she was about to bust the case wide open of the assassination of JFK, and then she died in rather odd circumstances. So we may be reading her book starting around November or December. We'll see when we get through. Probably I'll let that book take the place of Chappaquiddick when we finish Chappaquiddick. So I'm currently trying to make my way through Chappaquiddick at a nice clip so we can move on to that Mark Shaw book. But you guys let me know if you're interested in reading more from this. I don't think we would read straight through, but I might try to identify some parts that give us some fascinating different things on which to hang our hooks for why there were problems with the government's Warren Commission report. Let me know if you're interested. I think my favorite part of this was the Catherine articles. What about you guys? Do you love these 2 or what? She has had such a hard year this last year, and I just really admire her and her kind of stabilizing force on the monarchy. I think she's been really great. So let me know what you think of this second Vintage Variety Hour, and I will hope to see you next time. Bye.